Chapter 5, Listening. Listening is the primary way in which we receive new information. It's a learned process of receiving, interpreting, recalling, evaluating, and responding to verbal and nonverbal messages. So understanding how and why we listen. So as it's a process, as such, it doesn't have a defined start and finish. It's something that happens over and over again. It has cognitive, behavioral, and relational elements, and it doesn't unfold in a linear step-by-step fashion. So receiving the message. Before we can engage in the other steps in the listening process, we must take in stimuli through our senses. This part of the listening process is more physiological than other parts, which include cognitive and relational elements. So the receiving is just the physiological part of taking in sound. Then interpreting. During the interpreting stage of listening, we combine the visual and auditory information we receive, and we try to make meaning out of that. We try to give meaning to the information that we receive. In this process, it engages cognitive and relational processing as we take in informational, contextual, and relational cues and try to connect them in meaningful ways to previous experiences. So think about this. If you're talking to someone that you talk to all the time, it's a close friend, it's someone that you're very familiar with, then it's a lot easier for you to interpret messages. Versus if you're talking to someone you just met and you're not exactly sure what they mean with what they say, then that's a longer process of interpreting. So recalling the message. Our ability to recall information is dependent on some of the physiological limits of how memory works. Overall, our memories are known to be fallible. We forget about half of what we hear immediately after hearing it and recall 35% after 8 hours and 20% after a day. We have memory storage units. We have sensory storage, very large in terms of capacity, but limited in terms of length of storage. We hold a large amount of unsorted visual information, but only for about 1/10 of a second. We hold large amounts of unsorted auditory information for longer, up to 4 seconds. Our short-term memory is the mental storage capability that can retain stimuli for 20 seconds to a minute. Our long-term memory is our capability to which stimuli in short-term memory can be transferred if it's connected to existing schema in which information can be stored indefinitely. So long-term memory, to get things stored in long-term memory, when we have the initial message, we're able to connect that to something that's familiar with us, familiar to us, a previous experience, previous information. Once we're able to connect our short-term to something we've already received and stored long-term, then it becomes long-term memory. Working memory is temporarily accessed memory storage space that is activated during times of high cognitive demand. We can temporarily store information and process and use it at the same time. In my full-time job as a diagnostician, I test all areas of cognitive ability, and part of those are memories. So I test long-term memory and short-term working memory. So think about this. I deal often with students that are struggling in class and no one quite knows why they're struggling, and then we try to figure out why they're struggling. Well, if you think about memories, and many times when a student's struggling, it's because they have issues with one or both of their levels of memory. So if you have a student that's struggling with long-term memory and you think of every year in school, things build upon each other. The math skills you learned in 2nd grade build up to 3rd, 4th, and so on. But you don't have an intact long-term memory. Think about how difficult it is for that student to understand information from year to year because it's just not there. When we evaluate something, we make judgments about its credibility, completeness, and worth. In terms of credibility, we try to determine the degree to which we believe a speaker's statements are correct and true. In terms of completeness, we try to read between the lines to say and evaluate the message in relation to what we know about the topic or the situation being discussed. So every time we listen to a message, we take it in, we begin to process it, then we evaluate it in terms of what we think about the message. Then we respond. Responding entails to sending some sort of verbal or nonverbal message back that indicates we're attentive and we understand, or we don't understand. So we send verbal and nonverbal feedback while another person is talking and after they are done. Back channel cues are the verbal and nonverbal signals we send while someone is talking and consist of verbal cues like oh, really? Those kind of things are the cues that we do throughout. And it can be like head nods or something, eye contact. Those are cues that indicate that we're listening. Paraphrasing is a responding behavior that can also show that you understand what communication is. So you can say, I can't believe that he said this to you, and you kind of paraphrase what they told you. All of those things, when you respond, it tells your audience that you're with them, you're listening. Listening helps us achieve communication goals, physical, instrumental, relational, and identity. Listening is important for our academic, professional, and personal lives. So the main purpose of listening: to focus on messages sent by other people or noises coming from our surroundings, to better our understanding of other people's communication, to critically evaluate people's messages, to monitor nonverbal signals, to indicate that we are interested or paying attention, to emphasize with others and show we care for them. So you think about your relationships, that's a relational maintenance. A friend's talking to you about a big problem that they have, you're showing that you're listening and you're caring. To engage in negotiation, dialogue, or other exchanges that result in shared understanding or agreement on an issue. So there's different types of listening. Discriminative listening is focused and usually instrumental type of listening that is primary physiological and occurs mostly at the receiving stage of the listening process. So I think about this. So sometimes at night, I hear a noise and then I'm like, I think that's okay. I don't think that's anything to be concerned about. And then other times I hear a noise and think, I may need to get up and check out what that was. So sometimes we choose if it's something we focus on or it's something we ignore. Informational listening entails listening with the goal of comprehending and retaining information, but we're not evaluating. It's just the goal of understanding what the person's saying and remembering it. Critical listening entails the goal of analyzing or evaluating it. So when you're listening to the message, you're not just listening for the information, you're deciding whether you agree or disagree, if you feel like it's right or wrong or valid or invalid. Sometimes we decide we need more info. Empathetic listening is the most challenging form of listening, and it occurs when we try to understand or experience what a speaker is thinking or feeling. So we do this a lot in our interpersonal relationships. Listening styles: we have people-oriented listeners. They're concerned about the needs and feelings of others and may get distracted from a specific task or the content of a message in order to address feelings. Action-oriented listeners prefer well-organized, precise, and accurate information. They can become frustrated if the speaker is perceived as being long-winded or disorganized. Content-oriented listeners are analytic, and they enjoy processing complex messages. And time-oriented listeners are concerned with completing tasks and achieving goals, and they want to get the information they need as quickly as possible. So barriers to effective listening. There's several barriers to effective listening, and I think at some point we're all guilty of most of them. Environment and physical barriers to listening. We have psychological noise, which is noise stemming from our psychological states. We're in a bad mood. We just don't feel well. We're grouchy, therefore we don't care to listen. Or physiological noise. We are sick. We're injured. We have some sort of bodily stress that's taking over our focus. Cognitive and personal barriers of listening. So sometimes that happens when we don't care for the person that we're listening to speaking. We don't really like the person, so we just kind of ignore them. The difference between speech and thought rate. People speak at a rate of 125 to 175 words per minute. We can process between 400 and 800 words per minute. This difference gives us the opportunity to become distracted while listening. So we can listen and still get distracted if the speaker is not meeting our stimulus needs. Selective attention is our tendency to pay attention to messages that benefit us and filter out others. So sometimes I think in class, especially in your face-to-face class, and I can tell students are kind of zoning out, and there's a couple of words that I can say that gets their attention. So thinking about the upcoming test, this will be on the test. And then all of a sudden their spidey sense comes off. And they're like, okay, what? What about test? I heard a test. So sometimes we filter what we think is important and we focus on what we want to focus on. Responsive preparation refers to our tendency to rehearse what we're going to say next while a speaker is still talking. I can tell you I'm extremely guilty of this. I think a lot of us are. So someone's telling you a story and the first thing you think of, oh, that reminds me of a story that I have. So as soon as they pause, I'm going to get my story in because I think it's better. Or, we just really want to get something out there. So instead of listening, we are preparing to talk as soon as they stop. Lack of listening preparation. Sometimes we're just not prepared to listen. We did not come into an interaction to really focus or listen intently. Sometimes the speaker's bad. We don't like the speaker. The speaker is not an effective speaker. And then sometimes it's prejudice. I don't agree with what you have to say. Therefore, I'm not going to listen to you. So bad listening practices are interrupting. Distorted listening, we get the order of information wrong. We forget the order. We adapt or edit. We skew information. Eavesdropping, we sometimes get parts of a conversation that wasn't meant for us. Aggressive listening is that we are just kind of waiting to attack what the speaker says. Like, I'm going to listen to you, but I have no intention of agreeing with you. So as soon as you stop talking, I'm going to pounce and attack on what I disagree with you with. Narcissistic listening is self-centered and self-absorbed, in which listeners try to make the interaction about them, and they continue to redirect the conversation to them by interrupting and changing the topic. I know none of us would do that, but there are others out there that do. Pseudo-listening is pretending like you're listening. I think we do this a lot in classes. I do this in church, where we look like we're the best listener ever. We have our spiral in front of us. We have a pen in our hand. We're looking at the speaker. We're even nodding occasionally, but in reality, we're planning our lunch. And so we're not paying attention to what the speaker says. We just appear to be. Improving listening. To improve listening at the receiving stage, prepare to listen. Discern between intentional messages and just extra noise. Concentrate on stimuli most relevant to your purpose and goal. Be mindful of the selection and attention process as much as possible. Pay attention to turn-taking signals so you can follow the conversational flow and avoid interrupting while someone else is speaking. Identify main points and supporting points. This is at the interpreting stage. Use contextual cues to form a person or environment to discern additional meaning. Be aware of how relational, cultural, and situational contexts can influence our meaning. Be aware of the different meanings of silence. So sometimes silence means I can't find my words. Sometimes silence means I'm kind of upset. Note difference in tone of voice and other paralinguistic cues that influence meaning. At the recalling stage, use multiple sensory channels to decode messages and make more complete memories. Repeat, rephrase, and reorganize information to fit your cognitive preferences. And use mnemonics or a gimmick to help you recall. And at the evaluating stage, separate facts, inferences, and judgments. Be familiar with and able to identify persuasive strategies and fallacies of reasoning. Assess the credibility of the speaker and the message, and be aware of your own bias and how your perceptual filters can create barriers to effective listening. And at the responding stage, ask appropriate clarifying and follow-up questions. Give feedback that's relevant to the speaker's purpose. Adapt your response to the speaker and the context, and don't let the preparation and rehearsal of your response diminish earlier stages of listening. In other words, I have a question I'm going to ask as soon as they stop, but I'm going to not listen until they stop so I remember my question. We're all guilty of doing that. Active listening refers to the process of pairing outwardly visible positive listening behaviors with positive cognitive listening practices. So when we're an active listener, it can help us overcome barriers to effective listening. So think about, what are my goals? How does this message relate to me? And what listening type and style is most appropriate for the message? Internal dialogue. Given that we can process more words per minute than people can speak, we engage in internal dialogue, making good use of intrapersonal communication to become a better listener instead of to chase another squirrel down a path. Covert coaching involves sending yourself messages containing advice about better listening. You're getting distracted by this. It's time to refocus. Self-reinforcement involves sending yourself affirmative and positive message. You're being a good listener. You've been on task. This is going to help you in the future. And covert questioning involves asking yourself questions about the content in ways that focuses your attention and reinforces the material. So what's the main idea from that PowerPoint slide? Why is he talking about this specific situation? Other tools to help with concentration and memory. Mental bracketing refers to the process of intentionally separating out intrusive or irrelevant thoughts that may distract you from your listening, and mnemonics, or techniques that can help you recall information. Active listening behaviors, eye contact, reference previous statements made by the speaker, be excited and engage, and take notes. So listenable messages and effective feedback. So how to create a listenable message. Use shorter, actively worded sentences. Use personal pronouns. Use lists or other organizational constructions like problem, solution, pros, cons, compares, contrast. Simplify things. Use transitions and use examples to make things relevant for your audience. When giving feedback, be specific, be descriptive, be positive and constructive, be realistic and relevant. Give yourself formal feedback. Identify your strengths and weaknesses. Evaluate yourself within the context of the task. Set goals for the next time and revisit those goals and assess progress at regular intervals. Being an effective listener can help us in every aspect of our life. It can definitely help us as a student because we learn tools to really focus in classes as we listen to information. In our work life, it helps to make sure that we're attentive and on task, that we're doing things the way we were instructed to do them, and it helps maintain good professional relationships. And of course, in our professional life and our personal lives, it helps build and foster our interpersonal relationships and our friendships by showing people that we care. We're listening to them. We care about what they have to say. We can reference back something that they told us last week because we're involved in their lives and we're paying attention.